I want to go to our guest in just a second, but JD, during the break, somebody sent him go ahead and tell them. People need to hear about this.
Yeah, Mike just sent me a fantastic email, including a link to a website that shows real-time internet attacks that are going on all over the country or all over the world right now. And so the internet site is MAP, the word map, .ipviking.com. So it's map.ipviking.com. And I brought Joyce over to my side of the computer during the break so she could see the absolute onslaught of attacks that were going on from China to the United States. This page kind of shows like a map and then a bunch of streaks which kind of show the direction these attacks are going in, and it looked like a meteor shower, did it not?
Oh, my goodness. I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, it was like a full-blown, full-scale attack coming on the Internet. You look at this thing and it looks like global thermonuclear war going on the Internet right now. So just interesting site, something else to be aware of. I appreciate the listener, Mike, sending that to me because this is kind of stuff I really, really like. So.
Oh, my goodness. You've got to see this. And it shows, but there's something going on. There's something beneath the surface that's happening. There are too many people that are catching on to the fact that we've been lied to. And James Perloff's book is one of the excellent books to help people understand, how we have been lied to and what the real truth is. Truth is a Lonely Warrior by James Perloff, Unmasking the Forces Behind Global Destruction, which is available at the Power Mall. And
super fortunate to have James coming on to the show again today. He takes away from his valuable free time to come and discuss all kinds of interesting things with us. He is a freelance author. He has contributed to The New American since the mid-1980s. His first book, Shadow of Powers, is actually an expose of private influence on American foreign policy and has sold over 100,000 copies. His newest book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, as Joyce just mentioned, is kind of a great go-to book for people who are just learning about how these institutions work to influence what is going on in our country and what is going on in the world. Truth as a Lonely Warrior and probably Daniel Brigman's Forever 1776 are my two first books that when someone wants to learn about these things, I take both of those books to them, and that's my gift to them. Mr. Perloff, thank you so much for joining us on the Power Hour today.
Well, not only thank you for having me on, but thank you for bringing the truth to people every day in the ways that you do it, in multiple ways.
Well, we are doing our best, and it's because of people like you that we're able to meet in the middle and get all this valuable information out to people. Now, last week, a lot of people might not know, was the 75th anniversary of the very beginning of World War II. And given the global turmoil that we find ourselves in right now, we kind of thought it would be important to look back at World War II, the events that led us to that, and see if we can't draw some correlation between how we got into that war, what the results of that war were, and where we're going now. So to talk about that today, we've invited Mr. Perloff on. Do you want to start with just a basic background on you and how you got interested in becoming a historian, and then we can talk about World War II from a historical perspective, sir?
Well, what got me interested is the mainstream media not explaining things in a way that made sense. For me, the real beginning was back in 1978 when I read Gary Allen's book, Done Dead, Call It Conspiracy. That led me to writing my own book that kind of expanded on that, The Shadow of Power, 1988, and I've been in the truth movement ever since.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so let's look at what people don't know about World War II. We've talked, quite a bit in the past about false flags and about how all wars ultimately are bankers' wars. But let's talk about World War II. What would you say would have been the first main ingredient in getting the country prepared for World War II, or what were the things that contributed to us getting involved in that war?
Well, of course, the false flag was Pearl Harbor, which we will deal with today, and the other was the propagandizing of Germany and Japan allegedly being on a mission to conquer the world. But something I'd like to bring up at this outset is that people believe that this is the one war that was a good war. You can criticize other wars. You can make a case against the Spanish-American or World War I or the Vietnam War, Iraq War, but not this one. This is sort of the untouchable war. It's the one that, whether you're liberal or conservative, you think it's a good war,
right.
Which really doesn't make sense because the oligarchy that's been running our nation was in place well before this war began. The CFR and the Fed were already there. And so the question is, why do people think that World War II was such a good war? And there was an answer to that, and which I think we should touch on before we commence to examine it. You get a lot of insight from a quote from Charles Beard, who was a nonconformist historian, even though he was president of the American Historical Association. I'm going to quote what he said, 1947, in an editorial in the Saturday Evening Post. He said, quote, "The Rockefeller Foundation and the Council on Foreign Relations intend to prevent a repetition of what they call the debunking journalistic campaign following World War I. This means that the Foundation and Council don't want journalists to examine too closely and criticize too freely the official propaganda regarding our basic aims and activities during World War II. In short, they hope that the policies of Franklin D. Roosevelt will escape in coming years the critical analysis that befell the policies of Woodrow Wilson and the Allies after World War I." Wow. Unquote. Now, just to unpack that, World War I had been successfully debunked. People figured out that the Lusitania was a false flag. It was carrying munitions, not just women and children. The atrocity stories about the Germans cutting off the hands of Belgian children turned out to all be false. And they'd been taught they were fighting for noble principles in World War I, but then the Graham Committee of Congress revealed that Bernard Baruch and the Bankses had defrauded the American taxpayer out of $6 billion of war munitions that were never manufactured or delivered. And so people were upset, and they decided after World War II, we're not going to let that happen. We're not going to allow another truth movement. Right. So we're going to propagandize this thing to the nth degree, and that's why you've seen a steady stream, unending stream of World War II movies, from Casablanca to The Dirty Dozen to Saving Private Ryan. Hollywood has never gotten tired of making movies about World War II, and what they've done is create the big lie. It's like evolution. You repeat it often enough, even though it's absurd, people will think it's true, and that's why how World War II has come to be embedded as a good war. And because of that, even some of your seasoned listeners on the Power Hour might feel offended by some of what we say today, because it's been so well entrenched in the public mind as a good war.
Well, I find it so amazing that no matter how far back you look in history, you can see the bankers wanting to control the media and being able to use the media to then drive the propaganda towards, whatever it is that they want to get accomplished. But, boy, I think it's really amazing that they took that opportunity to look at World War I and say, well, we really kind of screwed up there because we allowed the truth to come out. And so we're going to really ramp up the propaganda effort for the World War II. But I'd never even thought about the Hollywood aspect of making movies and getting all of that kind of national fervor in front of people and really reinforcing that. Had no idea that was a reaction to the World War I snafu that they found themselves in.
Yeah, World War II is only unique in the view we've been given of it. It's actually a continuation of World War I, and World War III would be a continuation of the same goals. If we have time before the break, I'd like to just go over what the goals were of World War II from the bankster perspective.
Well, I would like to do that. Before we're kind of up against a break in about a minute and a half, so I want to save that for the next segment. But when we were talking about how World War I was a continuation, World War II was a continuation of World War I, what do you mean by that?
I mean that the goals were the same, and that's what we'll elaborate on.
Ah, okay. Well, okay, I want to get back to the good war then, one final section, and ask, what is it that they are hanging their hat on? What is it about the war that they're saying was the good aspect of the war?
Oh, the good aspect was that we were defeating this plan to conquer the world, that Japan and Berlin were attempting to conquer and enslave all mankind, which actually is their goal, the banksters' goal, the goal of the Illuminati, but that's what Americans were led to be convinced about, the Germans and Japanese, and we will take that up in the course of this show.
Okay. Well, I think this is we're off to a fantastic start so far. James Perloff is our guest, and you can find out more about James Perloff by going to www.jamesperloff.com, and Perloff is spelled with 2 F's at the end. And we are talking about his new book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, and the history of World War II today. We were just talking about how the propaganda machine had really geared up after World War I and a continuation of the goals moving into World War II. Let's see here.
Let me just, I know this is kind of off the subject right now because we're talking about World War II, but I want everybody to think in terms of World War III. And what we're seeing right now is, can any of this stuff be seen now more in its sort of created phase in World War II than we used to. We used to think that was history and that was the way it happened. We'll be back after this 4-minute break with James Perloff. Stay tuned to the Power Hour. This is Joyce.
And JD.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Power Hour radio show. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 24 minutes past the hour and the third hour of our broadcast today on the 9th day of September. My name is J.D. Moore. With me, as usual, is Joyce Riley. And we are speaking today with Mr. James Perloff. We're getting a history lesson on World War II. And because the anniversary of World War II, 75th anniversary, was last week, we felt it was important to look at that, especially going forward towards World War III, which we're kind of feeling like we might be going towards right now. So we brought James on, and we were just discussing the motives behind World War II in terms of the banking interests and how they were a continuation of the motives that actually presented themselves in World War I. So if you'd like to pick it up right there, James, go right ahead, sir. You have the floor.
Right. The motives of World War II, even though they've made this into sort of a unique good war through propaganda, it was not at all unique. It's part of the Illuminati, what I would call the three-headed hydra of globalism, communism, and Zionism. In terms of globalism, as you know, they have a goal of world government, and so World War I led to the very first formal world government. Even though it was weak, the League of Nations. World War II led to a stronger world government, the UN, and a World War III would be fulfilled with their ultimate goal of a complete world government. In terms of communism, World War I generated the very first communist country, the Soviet Union. World War II empowered communism and spread it over half the globe. World War III, if we had it, would result in a Stalinist socialist state ruling the whole world. In terms of Zionism, World War I created the Balfour Declaration, which Britain issued to the banker Walter Rothschild, promising to secure Palestine as a Jewish homeland. World War II created the modern political state of Israel. And if we had a World War III, you would see the Antichrist reigning from a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. That is the purpose of the Zionism. It's predicted in 2 Thessalonians, where it says he will oppose, speaking of a man of lawlessness, he will oppose and exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. And to this continuum, we might add, we talked about the banksters from the viewpoint of banking. World War I was financed largely through the Federal Reserve, which was created just 6 months before Archduke Ferdinand's assassination. World War II created the World Bank and IMF. Those were planned by the Council on Foreign Relations even before the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference. And if we had a World War III, you would see a global currency, a planetary euro, probably in digital form, and thus you could see the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy that no one can buy or sell without the mark of the Antichrist. So World War II is fitting snugly between these two wars. It's part of a continuum.
Well, how did the globalists use World War II to forward their goals of, the getting us towards this global empire, this, worldwide currency? How was World War II actually used to implement those things?
Well, as we were saying, they created, for example, the World Bank, and at the Bretton Woods Conference, they talked about creating a world currency right there called Bancor, but it's just a matter of what are people ready for. When they created the League of Nations, people weren't ready for an all-powerful world government yet. That's their goal, is all-powerful, but they have to boil the frog, you see. They have to introduce these things step by step.
Well, I'm wondering how much further off into the future do you think that's going to be? Do you feel like we're kind of right now on the cusp of World War III, or do you feel like there's maybe some more time, just out of curiosity?
Well, I think that that's a possibility. There's different ways to interpret these events, but between the Ukraine and ISIS in the Middle East, it does look like they may be very well headed in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about...
What is your take, Ben, at the Power Hour?
Well, I think we all are kind of in the belief that, well, I'll tell you, my personal belief is that we are trying to get rid of old weapons right now. I feel like, if Russia understands that we have got drones, that why would Russia then risk putting a whole bunch of drone targets on the border of Ukraine where there might be a hot spot? And I kind of look at, our government is giving out all kinds of military equipment to, police departments around the country. We're trying to get rid of our stockpile of these older weapons weapons, because even though they look all, hardcore and high tech and stuff like that, they're really like 1970s, 1980s technology. So I feel like we're witnessing kind of a clearinghouse right now. We're trying to give as many of our weapons away and trying to use as many of them as we can, because the military-industrial complex makes money by building more of them.
I didn't realize they had closeout sales like Kmart. That's interesting.
Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to start a global skirmish when with the capability of both sides is so profound. It doesn't make sense to me. So I look at this like, again, both sides work for the same team. We talked about how communism and globalism kind of came out at the same time. There's two sides of the same coin all working towards the same goal, in my opinion. So there has to be some sort of teamwork going on behind the scenes. I look at this situation in Ukraine as if mostly it's just another attempt at the United States and NATO to acquire oil and drilling rights and things like that. More resource allocation as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, we've got to take a 3-minute break. I'd like to come back and hear your opinion on that, and then I want to get into the false flag of Pearl Harbor and talk about some of the things that people don't know, because we should be looking for another false flag right now, ladies and gentlemen. Keep it right here at the Power Hour, another 3-minute break. James Perloff joining us today. We're speaking today with Mr. James Perloff and getting a major history lesson on World War II. James Perloff's website is jamesperloff.com. You can go there and you can order the books. You can also get Truth as a Lonely Warrior from the Power Mall. It is on special right now. Rosie was nice enough to put it on special. You can get it today for $17.75. Again, this is one of the first books that I would give to somebody who is awakening to the truth movement. There's so much truth, and the breadth of information in this book is just astounding. James, could you do us a favor and explain to our listeners who might include some homeschoolers or people who may not understand exactly what happened at the onset of World War II, such as myself, what actually happened in terms of the false flag and Pearl Harbor? What do we actually know about that event and how it got us involved with the war?
All right, yes. Every war has a false flag to get America involved, and the Spanish-American War was the Signet of the Main, and World War I, Lusitania, Vietnam, Tonkin Gulf. Of course, we have 9/11, probably the biggest false flag of them all. But in 1941, what brought us into the Second World War was the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, when the Lusitania had gone down, Franklin D. Roosevelt had been the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and across the Atlantic, his cousin Winston Churchill was head of the Admiralty. So that kind of sends chills up your spine when you realize that these two guys are now heads of state as World War II approaches. And Roosevelt did everything he could to get another Lusitania. He did everything he could to provoke Germany. He was having our destroyers depth charge their U-boats in the summer of 41, hoping to get another incident. But the Germans were under strict orders not to retaliate. They knew that America's coming into World War I had lost that war for them. They said, no thanks, we're not going to have another Lusitania. So the attention had turned to Japan. And, guys, I've done 90-minute shows with no commercials, just on Pearl Harbor, so I hope I can come back sometime to treat the subject in depth with you. But just to, I'll give you just one of many quotes I could give, but I'm going to quote what War Secretary Henry Stimson wrote in his diary after meeting with President Roosevelt. Stimson, a member of the CFR and Skull and Bones, he said this, quote, "We face the delicate question of the fencing to be done, so to be sure that Japan is put into the wrong and makes the first bad move, overt move. The question was how we should maneuver them into the position of firing the first shot," unquote, Henry Stimson. So a eight-point plan of provocation was drawn up for President Roosevelt by Naval Intelligence, which closed with these words, quote, "If by these means Japan could be led to commit an overt act of war, so much the better," unquote. And the most important of these provocations given to Japan was an all-out trade embargo by Britain and the United States in July of 1941. The timing is important. In June of 1941, Germany or allies had invaded the Soviet Union. Stalin was paralyzed with fear. If Japan struck from the east, communism would be caught in a two-pronged pincer. Communism might be wiped out. The Illuminati had created the Soviet Union. They wanted to make sure Japan did not join in that attack, and the all-out embargo, which included food and oil, ensured they would not, that they would turn south. And also, to make sure that they attacked first, we gave them the bait. And I don't know if Robert Stinnett discussed this part with you when he was on your show to talk about Pearl Harbor, but the decision to base the fleet at Pearl Harbor, to move it from the west coast of America to Hawaii was catastrophic. It was so insane that the fleet commander, Admiral J.L. Richardson, flew to Washington in a rage. He spoke to Roosevelt, gave him all the reasons we should not put the fleet in Pearl Harbor. Our ships would be boxed together like sardines, which they were, if you look at a map of Ford Island and Pearl Harbor. The fleet would be approachable from 360 degrees of uninhabited water, whereas you could never make a surprise attack on the West Coast. You'd have to pass all kinds of commercial shipping to get there. We had to supply the fleet across 2,000 Pacific miles. It had very limited dry dock, very poor oil storage facilities. 37% of the population of Hawaii was ethnically Japanese, making it ideal for sabotage, espionage. It would destroy the morale of the men to be that far from home. Roosevelt could not give him any good reasons for basing the fleet in Pearl Harbor, and so Roosevelt just fired him for protesting that decision, and he was replaced. Admiral Richards was replaced by Admiral Husband Kimmel as fleet commander of the Pacific Fleet. Kimmel took that position believing and trusting that Washington intelligence would provide him with any information pointing to an attack on Pearl Harbor, and of course, as you guys know, that was a misplaced trust.
That is so true.
How much information is there that we know of that shows that that we had intercepted communications regarding Pearl Harbor? How much forethought or how much foreknowledge do we really have, can we say now?
Oh, the evidence is so overwhelming, and there's so many books on it. You can even go to YouTube and watch the BBC documentary, Sacrifice at Pearl Harbor. But for one thing, we had cracked Japan's diplomatic code. This is the code they use to communicate to their embassies around the world. It's called the Purple Code. We actually devised a facsimile of their deciphering machine, so we were reading their diplomatic traffic on a same-day basis. And every day, President Roosevelt was reading that traffic. And what did the messages reveal? Well, it revealed that the Japanese consul in Honolulu had been ordered to divide Pearl Harbor into 5 areas and to report the exact locations of our ships in dock to Tokyo on a regular basis. They revealed that the Germans had been told by the Japanese embassy in Berlin that war was about to begin. We actually decoded the declaration of war before they handed it to our Secretary of State, Cordell Hull. But it wasn't just that. It was the personal warnings we received. Just as an example, Joseph Grew, our ambassador to Japan, sent this message to Washington in 1941, quote, "The Peruvian minister has informed a member of my staff that he has heard from many sources that in the event of trouble breaking out between the United States and Japan, the Japanese intend to make a surprise attack against Pearl Harbor with all their strength," unquote. And the other warnings that came from J. Edgar Hoover, from Brigadier General Elliot Thorpe, who was a military observer in Java. The Dutch warned us about the attack through their naval attaché in Washington, F.G.L. Weigerman. It just goes on. And you guys have had Robert Stinnett on, right?
Right.
Robert Stinnett, author of Day of Deceit, he was the one who, through the Freedom of Information Act, revealed that we were also reading not only their diplomatic messages, but their naval codes had been broken by us, and we were intercepting their messages, such as this one from Admiral Yamamoto to the Japanese First Air Fleet, November the 26th, 1941, quote, "The task force, keeping its movements secret and maintaining close guard against submarines and aircraft, shall advance into Hawaiian waters, and upon the very opening of hostilities shall attack the main force of the United States fleet and deal it a mortal blow," unquote. You cannot read that message and not know its intent. This information, I have written several articles on Pearl Harbor, which you can click on my website if you go to articles, but you'll find it in Stinnett's book, Day of Deceit, or Infamy by John Toland, or The Final Secret of Pearl Harbor by Rear Admiral Robert Theobald, Admiral Kimmel's story by Admiral Kimmel. The list just goes on and on. The evidence is overwhelming. We knew about Pearl Harbor. They wanted to happen. It's another false flag in a long series.
Well, and it strikes me that this would have to have been the largest false flag that these people have been able to pull off, up until that time. The logistical nightmare that it would have required to try and keep part of that information hidden for so long, and then to allow such an amazingly large attack to take place. It really shows the level and the willingness that these people are willing to go to make sure that they get the wars when they want them. And that, to me, is just the most amazing part of this whole thing, James.
Yes, and there was a complete cover-up afterwards. You know, the official investigating body called the Roberts Commission, which laid all the blame on our Hawaiian commanders, Admiral Kimmel and General Short, who had been totally shut off from all of this information. And subsequently, when a Naval Court of Inquiry and the Army Pearl Harbor Board was held in 1944, they found out all this information to the foreknowledge, but that was suppressed and quashed by Roosevelt using his Freemasonic friends to get officers to reverse their testimony, and the public never found out, and that's why all these books eventually came out by the Truth Movement in its own day about Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to get back to something that you mentioned earlier. We were talking about the propaganda idea that both Japan and Germany had kind of set out to conquer the world. What evidence do we have that negates that theory, if you would, sir?
Well, first of all, if you look at through the Japanese and German archives, there is no evidence whatsoever that a plan existed to conquer the world. It was logistically impossible. The Germans did not have a single aircraft carrier. They let me just quote something that Charles Lindbergh said. He said, when he was head of the America First Committee, he said, quote, "Let us not be confused by this talk of invasion. Great armies must cross oceans by ship. No foreign navy will dare approach within bombing range of our coast," unquote. Now, the point he's making here, to stage an invasion, you've got to have air cover, and the Germans, as they crossed the Atlantic and tried to invade us, their ships simply would have been bombed by our land-based Air Force because they didn't have a single aircraft carrier. It would have been impossible. In fact, Admiral Dönitz, their sub-fleet commander after the war, he said they never intended to do that, and he compared it to trying to invade the moon, trying to invade America. There was no plan. It was logistically impossible, and there's no evidence for it other than what you see in Hollywood movies like Casablanca and speeches by President Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's an important point, is just to show really, blatantly and out front that these people, the propaganda movement is just so huge that they can get you to think one thing, they can get you to commit all kinds of crimes and absurdities, and it's just the way that it goes. I wonder about your personal opinion about ISIS and the situation, and I know that it may not be something you've studied a lot, but we're hearing everything from the State Department how ISIS is now the big threat. There's going to be this threat that ISIS is going to come and invade the United States. Would you feel like this is the same sort of rhetoric that we heard from World War II type of thinking?
That's a good point. ISIS seems to be taking the place of Al-Qaeda, which we know was, like ISIS, trained and equipped by the U.S. to begin with, and so it seemed to be very much an artificial construct. You do have some comparisons taking place with Putin being compared to Hitler, and the stereotyping of Muslims as our enemies. There's nothing they'd like better than to see a war between Christianity and Islam, of course, is part of the whole construct of trying to destroy every ideology, religion, and government that stands in the way of a new world order.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get back to the propaganda issue, because it's so prevalent in just about every topic that you and I seem to have, James. Talk about this idea of Britain and Churchill being the shining beacon of humanity, or the standing alone in taking on this whole World War II concept, because that is a propaganda type of motif also, is it not?
Yes, and I should say that in order to support their claims that Japan and Germany were trying to conquer the world, just to take Japan as an example, Japan had sent troops into Manchuria, which was rather incorrectly called northern China, and this is supposedly proof that Japan was the beginning of their plan to conquer the world. But let me just quote what was said by Dr. Anthony Kubik. He was chairman of Political Science Department, University of Dallas, in his book, How the Far East Was Lost. Let me just, to set the stage for this, understand that the Japanese saw that communism was on the march. Stalin and Lenin had attacked, they'd absorbed the Ukraine and Belarus and Georgia. They'd attacked, of course, later on the Baltic nations and invaded Finland. And in the Far East, they'd attacked Outer Mongolia and the southwestern province of Xinjiang. And Japan was very aware that they were next on the hit list if communism continued to spread. So here's what Dr. Kubik wrote. He wrote this, quote, "It was apparent to Japanese statesmen that unless bastions of defense were built in Manchuria, and Inner Mongolia, communism would spread through all of China and seriously threaten the security of Japan. But the State Department seemed not to regard Japan as a bulwark against Soviet expansion in North China. As a matter of fact, not one word of protest was sent by the State Department to the Soviet Union, despite her absorption of Xinjiang and Outer Mongolia, while at the same time Japan was censured for stationing troops in China, unquote. So this is actually very characteristic of what happened in World War II. They had zero tolerance for any military maneuver by the so-called fascist states, Japan and Germany, but they had unlimited tolerance for any conquest by Stalin. And just to exemplify that, of course, it was a conflict in Poland, right, that began the war officially when Germany invaded Poland in September 1939. Britain and France declared war on Germany. And what we're supposed to believe is that Churchill and the French cared so much about the sacred sovereignty of Poland that they were willing to sacrifice the lives of hundreds of thousands of their sons to save Poland. But look what happened. In September of 1939, the Russians also invaded Poland. And what was the reaction of Britain and France to that? It was yawn, ho-hum, who cares? And when the war was over, Poland had lost her sovereignty anyway. She was occupied by Soviet tanks. A puppet government was installed by Stalin, and nobody cared. But how could nobody care? How could we say there was a no big deal when we just fought a war in which 60 million people died, and the reason the war began, allegedly, was over the sovereignty of Poland?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a wicked double standard, is it not? I mean, I don't know how you could possibly justify that.
Well, as further evidence that the Germans were trying to conquer the world, they pointed out, well, there were basically three phases to what they called German aggression. One was the retaking of her lost lands for the Versailles Treaty, the Rhineland and the Sudetenland and what they call the Polish Quarter. The second phase was the war against France and England. The third was the invasion of Russia. And this is supposed to represent a progressive plan of world conquest. Let me point out that when they attacked Russia in 1941, Stalin had amassed 170 divisions on his western border. He was ready to invade. This has been admitted since Leonid Brezhnev admitted it, and since Gorbachev came to power. The Russians admitted that Stalin was planning to invade. He thought that the French and Germans and English had exhausted each other, and that Europe was his for the taking. Now, when Germany attacked Russia, it wasn't just Germany. It was the armies of Finland, Croatia, Italy, Romania, Hungary. This was the nations of Europe against Soviet communism. Even though Spain was neutral, 47,000 Spaniards volunteered and left their homeland to join that fight because they saw what the communists had done when they tried to take over Spain. And I should mention, this is a shocker to some people. There were two divisions of Belgian soldiers.
We've got to take a quick 3-minute break. We're going to come back and we will finish up this discussion about World War II. Keep it right here at the Power Hour Radio Show. Listening to James Perloff today. Welcome back to the Power Hour Radio Show. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our final segment today with Mr. James Perloff. I'd recommend everyone go to jamesperloff.com and learn more. Again, go to the article section. You can find out all kinds of more background information on Pearl Harbor. And James writes all kinds of fantastic articles that are there. James, I think at the end of the day here for our discussion about World War II, I wanted to re-ask the question about what it was in the agenda that we can see carrying from World War I into World War II and potentially into World War III. What were the facets of that agenda that they were actually able to accomplish with World War II? James, are you there?
The state of Zionist Israel was one. The establishment of the UN as a progressive step. Remember, they have to do this step by step. They have to boil the frog. The steps of the UN, the establishment of a World Bank and as a step towards a global currency. And, of course, the spreading of communism over half the globe, as well as restructuring the planet and dethroning many countries.
And where do you think we are at then today? What do you think is, what's high on your radar today for where we're going from here?
Well, it's certainly not good when we see the drums of potential war being beaten in Ukraine, and the current situation with ISIS was Obama was not able to get those airstrikes that he wanted last year on Syria. Now people seem ready for action because they've seen these videos about beheadings or alleged beheadings, and I imagine they did some kind of a survey to gauge what the public reaction would be towards that. They're certainly trying to restructure the world. Their goals remain the same of global currency, global government, and a throne of the Antichrist in Zion.
Wow. Well, I think we're definitely zooming towards that right now. What are your opinions about those beheading videos, if I can ask?
I don't have an informed opinion, but I saw that even the New York Times has put in an article now saying that the beheading of James Foley was staged.
Yeah, we're kind of that opinion here at the Power Hour also, and there was it is amazing that Obama is now able to start to muster support for going and doing airstrikes there, because it's nice to have a feedback loop where they can tell you the news and they can poll you on the news, and then, they use that poll to decide whether or not your opinion is being swayed. But Rasmussen said the other day about 60% of the American people are ready to go back and do airstrikes in Syria and in Iraq, and even Obama came out and said that the border between Iraq and Syria has been blurred. So it seems to me like we are rapidly approaching a time when we are going to be dropping bombs again all over the planet.
Yes, it's amazing how much they can move public opinion through propaganda events, and of course sometimes even the polls may be rigged as well.
Mm-hmm. Who do you think is going to be mounting up on either side of this issue? Because we look at the financial situation and the new BRICS bank, and there's going to be competition for the central banks. Who's going to be on whose side? We know France and we know Russia and China are together, but where do you see everybody positioning themselves?
I imagine very nervously. I imagine that it seems that the EU is being dragged in on the American and British side, but I think with great reluctance because of the potential of economic sanctions, what the reprisals from Russia could do, or the potential of war.
So, but I mean, where do you see all the countries lining up? Who's lining up with whom?
Well, obviously, Britain and America will remain unified. As far as the other nations go, it seems like they're riding the fence a little bit, don't you think, in the EU?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I do. I think Germany, is kind of wanting to wait and see, but then I think they're getting a little frustrated with the EU. Anyway, well, I thank you very much for joining us today, James Perloff. Thanks for joining us on the Power Hour, and we look forward to having you back again.
Thanks so much, guys. Love to come back and talk about Pearl Harbor in depth sometime when we have a chance.
Thanks, James.
Tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, the Moriartys will be joining us. The Moriartys will be talking Libya. What happened to those planes over there? What do they know about it? And does that mesh with the official Fox News story that was aired this weekend? The official one, of course.
That's right.
And Dr. Gary Coles will join us on World Suicide Prevention Day. I wasn't kidding about that. We'll talk about the dangers of psych drugs tomorrow. So you all have a blessed day. We love you all at the Power Hour. Thank you for joining us. It's all about the truth.
Take care, everybody. Make it a magical rest of your day.
See you tomorrow. Welcome back to Power Hour, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us, caring about your world, doing the next right and honorable thing. I just wanted to let you know that we're not going to have time to talk about the Afghani drug war because I'm going to do that on Friday. I want to give some of the history of the Afghan drug war. Right now, we're going to go to our guest, James Perloff, because there's so much that we need to know about what happened in Charleston. James Perloff is well known for his very, very accepted book, Shadow Power, and also for the Shadow Ring documentary that was just done. So we're going to be talking for a few minutes here before James Perloff joins us. We're going to get him on the line since we're not able to make contact with James McKinney right now. So we'll have James Perloff on in a few minutes. We're going to talk about the Charleston issue, the questions that he has regarding that. So we'll go to that in just a few minutes. Let me go back. I do have time right now, so I am going to talk about ISIS burns the CIA opium fields in Afghanistan, because there's more to this story, of course, than people remember, because it goes back so far. The Islamic State, they say, is trying to rout out the Taliban. Okay, we got the ISIS against Taliban, and you know the story. Anyway, the reports may ultimately result in the U.S. sending troops back into the country to protect these valuable, highly lucrative assets. In 2009, it was reported that the CIA controlled the opium trade in Afghanistan through, remember this guy, Ahmed Wali Karzai, the brother of the former President Hamid Karzai, who began his career as a fundraiser for the CIA's Mujahideen during the 1980s. You know, this thing is just so incestuous, it's disgusting. Anyway, the CIA-supported Mujahideen rebels engaged heavily in drug trafficking while fighting against the Soviet-supported government and its plans to reform the very backward Afghan society. Now, that is in a book William Blum wrote called The Real Drug Lords. The Golden Crescent drug trade, which is the area in Afghanistan, launched by the CIA in the 1980s, early 1980s, continues to be protected by U.S. intelligence in liaison with NATO occupation forces and the British military. In recent developments, British occupation forces have promoted opium cultivation through paid radio advertisements. And that was written by Michelle Chossudovsky in 2007. The corporate media, however, has portrayed the Taliban as the source of opium cultivation in the country. And prior to the U.S. invasion of the country, the Taliban were instrumental in outlawing the opium trade, according to the United Nations. Well, several years after the invasion and during the occupation of the United States, the drug trade soared to a record $65 billion, and Afghanistan produced about 92% of the world's opium. 92%. All that crime is due to the United States, with the equivalent of 3,500 tons leaving that country every year. Now, that has to be orchestrated, and that has to be by the U.S. military. Other figures literally put it at almost twice that, at 6,100 tons a year, not quite twice. In 2010, InfoWars reported a Geraldo Rivera interview with an American soldier who admitted guarding the opium fields in Afghanistan. In 2014, the opium trade reached a new high, according to the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime. And in many instances, drug money is currently the only liquid investment capital for black ops projects. And that's my editorial comment. In the second half of 2008, liquidity was the banking system's main problem, and hence liquid capital became an important factor. The U.S. has been involved in the creation and the domination of worldwide drug trade. They began running the business, the CIA did, in the 1950s. The real reason for the CIA? And where did they begin it? Burma, Vietnam, Laos, Latin America, and Afghanistan. I've talked to so many military people who told me we were involved in the drug trade from Vietnam to the United States. Anyway, Burma, Vietnam, Laos, Latin America, and Afghanistan. The CIA is also known as the Cocaine Import Agency, CIA. Has remained at the forefront of the international illicit drug trade. The journalist Gary Webb and San Jose Mercury News tied the CIA and the Contras to a large crack cocaine ring in Los Angeles. Webb paid with his life revealing that information to the public. Remember that. He was killed. What a sad situation. So there you got it. That is the history, some of the history, with the United States being the kingpin, the leader in drug trade, not just here, but around the world, getting the drugs for the people in the world. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. We're going to move to James Perloff now because I gave you his intro a little bit earlier. We're glad to have him join us today, kind of an hour early, so I do apologize to him for the change in the schedule. But we definitely want to take advantage while we have got him, and we're now talking to James Perloff. Thank you so much, James, for joining us in the Power Hour today. James, are you there?
Yes, I've just re-arrived. I had to shut off my other phone and do a couple other things here. So
okay, well, glad to have you join us today. Thank you very much for joining us and helping us to get to the issue of what is happening in, if anybody knows, in what is happening in Charleston, because this story just doesn't make any sense. But first of all, I want to congratulate you on Shadow Ring, a documentary that is absolutely one of the best I have ever seen. I hope everybody gets it, because we are busy exposing the lies that we have been told. and you've done an amazing job in putting it together in documentary form. So thank you for writing it, doing it, and for Austin, Chris, and Mary Ellen for having done an amazing job on Shadow Ring.
Well, and thank you for appearing on it. You gave us some unique perspectives that you've accrued over the years as a host of one of the very best alternative media shows, and so your contribution is part of the mix that's made this film a success so far.
Well, thank you very much. And what was it? Now, you wrote The Shadows of Power, which everybody is aware of. Truth is a Lonely Warrior, which we carry at the Power Mall. But what was it that, you've put the Truth is a Lonely Warrior in the book, unmasking the forces behind global destruction. But what was your motivation in doing Shadow Ring? What did you want to accomplish by doing that?
Well, I was asked, first of all, of course, by Free Mind Films to write a script. But what we were looking for here was to give people some context. When people talk about events like Charleston or 9/11, taken by themselves, they never make sense, because the first thing a person will say is, well, our government would never do that to us. And if they did do that to us, television news would tell us about it. So it's really important to give people the context of the history of this country, the fact that there's been a long pattern of false flags, to show people that there is an oligarchy that controls the government, whether we have a Republican or a Democrat in the White House, and that this same oligarchy is in control of the media. And once they have that fuller picture, these individual pieces like Charleston and 9/11 make a lot more sense.
Yeah, they really do. And thank goodness there are people like you who pay attention to this, record it, and then give it to us in either book or documentary form. And Free Mind Films deserves a lot of credit for the good work that they're doing on this film. Let's move to Charleston, because your article I thought was excellent on the 15 questions that need to be answered about South Carolina, about Charleston. And what was, do you think, the first thing that made your BS detector go off and you started wondering, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right?
Well, Joyce, originally we were going to be on only for about a half hour, and I'm really glad that we apparently have more time to discuss this. We could extend a little bit more, but the way I sort of had planned to discuss things today was there were a series of things that seemed to happen too fast, and actually there's 5 I'm going to mention, but the first one was, yes, the very first thing that caught my attention was that on the day of the shooting, or rather the day after, when they captured the suspect, Dylan Storm Roof, the media seemed to almost instantaneously have information about him. In very short order, they knew that he was a loner, he was troubled, he was a racist, they had a sound bite from a relative, and it seemed that they just had that information too fast. And it reminded me of 9/11, when CNN that very day was saying it's Osama bin Laden. They had a clip of someone saying that it was jet fuel that made the buildings collapse. And, of course, we have the famous clip of the BBC announcing Building 7 going down 20 minutes before it happened, as if they had been scripted. And you got that same feeling about the South Carolina event. But there were other things that also happened too fast, and I mentioned my blog post on Charleston. I'm indebted to the YouTube blogger, if that's the right term to use for YouTube, Jay Silver, Red Silver Jay, who has some great videos there. And he's got a clip of one of the families, the children of one of the slain. And I just want to put a disclaimer here that I don't know exactly what happened in Charleston. It's not my intention, if these people were executed in the manner the media said, to cast any aspersions on people who are deceased. But what he picked up on was that the family members were giving a media interview just 24 hours after learning that their mother had been slain, and 2 of them are smiling. They're not evidencing any grief, and it just seems strange. And I know that as Christians, we are to be strong in the face of tragedy, and we are to be forgiving. But, when you have a family member who, if you've expected their death for a long time because they have a terminal illness, and when they pass, the emotional shock wouldn't be too great. But when you lose someone suddenly and unexpectedly, and you've perhaps seen their corpse riddled with bullets and covered with blood, normally you'd be in a state of shock and a grieving process and not giving press conferences and smiling and talking about you filled with love just 24 hours afterwards. Again, people react differently to tragedy, but this was another pickup of something that seemed to be occurring too fast, that the family just went into acceptance within 24 hours. But Joyce, the thing that really grabbed me was that 48 hours after the shooting, the Justice Department announced that it was fast-tracking $29 million to the families.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
All right, we've got to go to a break. We've got a 4-minute break. We'll be back with James Perloff. $29 million for giving to this family? They never do that. Why? Who benefits? Cui bono. We'll be back with James Perloff. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Power Hour. Thank you for joining us. We're talking to our guest today, James Perloff, and the documentary is available at the Power Mall. Give us a call at 877-817-9829. You heard Kevin from Kansas City call in and say everybody needs this, and I really second that. It is called Shadow Ring, available at the Power Mall. And again, if you have unlimited minutes, that helps us out. 573-378-6049. And we also have the Truth is a Lonely Warrior book by James Perloff at the Power Mall. Go ahead, James. Continue on with the things that don't make sense about Charleston, please.
Yes, and these are things that occurred too quickly. This is the third one we're talking about now. It's the $29 million being fast-tracked to the families just 2 days after the shooting before any real investigation has taken place. And, of course, people get shot all the time in America. The government doesn't give them a nickel, and so the question is, why are these families getting in excess of $3 million apiece? And this was really enough for them, probably for some of them, just to retire on. And, of course, it raises the question whether or not this was then some type of government false flag operation, just the uniqueness of this cash flow. Another thing that occurred too quickly in my consideration is the church reopened for services 4 days after this incident, Joyce. And, you know, with a massacre with 9 people being shot to death, it's not just the bodies you've got to remove. There's the blood stains, and with a .45 caliber, I assume you've got body tissues that have been not just be grossly been just splattered about the church. And it just seems unusual. Also, isn't this a crime scene? Wouldn't it normally be taped off and roped off by the police? And, of course, I understand the idea of a strong Christian spirit and the idea of continuing to worship God in spite of tragedy. But nonetheless, this very rapid reopening of the church under these physical circumstances seems strange. And the fifth thing I put under the strange fast track category is, of course, we've had this banning of the Confederate flag. Somehow it's been made to blame for the incident and uploaded onto YouTube. And on my website blog post, I have quite a few embedded YouTube videos that Insightful Alternative Media have put up. But somebody noticed that just 4 days after the call for a ban on the Confederate flag, the Dukes of Hazzard cars already were being sold without the Confederate flag, and even the box is missing the Confederate flag. And so it would appear that someone was anticipating this, that this was orchestrated and not just a spontaneous reaction.
That is huge. That is huge. That the Dukes of Hazzard car was missing the Confederate flag at about the time this all took place in Charleston. That just it screams volumes to you, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, and there's other things, too, which don't necessarily go into the category of fast track, but there's quite a few. One is that the Department of Homeland Security had what they called an active shooter threat training program going on between June 15th and June 19th, and, of course, the shooting occurred on the 17th, right in the middle of that, and perhaps that wouldn't cause suspicion on the part of the alternative media. If it wasn't for the fact we've seen so many of these drills occurring. We saw it with the Boston Marathon, and you know that the Boston Globe, our newspaper, I live up in Boston, and the Boston Globe tweeted that there was going to be a bomb drill at that very location before the event took place, and you can see video that's been uploaded by people who were at the bombing, where you can hear a police announcement, "This is a drill, this is a drill." And of course, we know that on 9/11 there was a military exercise taking place in which the military was simulating a terrorist attack where planes were flown into bombings. We've seen this happen again and again, and we see it happen with Charleston. We also know that Jade Helm is getting underway, and I don't know to what extent you've been covering that. My previous post was on the risk that Jade Helm could be used to transition us into martial law over the course of the summer. And part of Jade Helm, which its logo is Master the Human Domain, part of Jade Helm is for special ops who are used in overseas operations for executions to blend in with civilians and to pretend that they are civilians, which raises the question of whether or not Dylann Roof might have been such an operative. And something that might suggest he could have been, there are a couple of things. He has done the same thing that Adam Lanza did up at Sandy Hook. He got just about 100% kill ratio with a handgun, which you know is not that easy to do. That's a point that Wolfgang Halberg made when he was on your show talking about Sandy Hook. How does this kid, weighs 115 pounds, not used to this equipment, get 100% kill ratio percentage when he's shooting?
That's incredible. That is incredible. And we'll come back with more after this 3-minute break with our guest today, James Perloff. Stay tuned to the Power Hour. This is Joyce Riley. 33 minutes after the hour. Thank you so much for supporting the Power Mall. Remember, apple cider vinegar on special at the Power Mall by Bragg's, and all of the items that Bragg's have on sale, including the olive oil, which is really good, and the salad dressings that they have. There's 2 different types of salad dressings. One's vinaigrette. The other one is a ginger dressing, on sale at the Power Mall. And then the charcoal. The book Charcoal Remedies, that book is a must if you want to know how to use charcoal in many, many, many different ways. It's available at the Power Mall also, and the charcoal tablets, and charcoal capsules are on special, along with the coconut charcoal, which is the best for radiation poisoning. And that would be Fukushima, of course. We're talking to James Perloff today. He's the author of Truth is a Lonely Warrior. And that book is available at the Power Mall. And you know, he asks a lot of questions like, who benefited from the sinking of the USS Maine? What happened at Pearl Harbor? Why did Admiral Kimmel and General Schwartz, all commanders of Pearl Harbor, want to be court-martialed? On and on and on. Why did Congressional Medal of Honor recipient James Stockdale, what did he reveal about Tonkin Gulf? The book is phenomenal. If you want to know the truth about the lies you've been told. And then Shadow Ring is a DVD, and both of these are available at the Power Mall. The Shadow Ring DVD and the book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, for $31.01. That's right, $31.01. It's on special at the Power Mall. Give us a call at 877-817-9829, 877-817-9829, or go to thepowermall.com. James Perloff is joining us, talking about what happened at Charleston that doesn't make sense or happened too fast. And, of course, that reloading, that issue really makes everybody kind of cringe who understands the use of weapons. Go ahead, please, James.
We were talking about the 100% kill percentage, or almost 100% kill percentage, similar to Adam Lanza, that he got, which could suggest that if this shooting was a real shooting, that is another thing that might suggest he could have been a military operative. You mentioned the reloading, and that raises the question. I heard your interview with Lori Pickney on this earlier in the week, but it raises the question of why didn't someone stop him while he was reloading, or why were people unable to escape? He had just a single handgun. And another thing in regard to that is, somebody picked this up on YouTube. I have the clip on my website blog post. But when in the still photo of him entering the church, you can see the outline of a bulletproof vest, and you can see the groin protector even hanging down beneath his shirt. So the question the YouTuber asked was, how does this kid who's unemployed afford a bulletproof vest, which is pretty expensive? But again, that raises the question if he could have possibly been a military operative. And we also have other relevant video. His famous Facebook page has been taken down, but one webmaster used the Wayback Machine. And for people who don't know it, the Wayback Machine captures snapshots of defunct websites and web pages, and it seems that his Facebook page really didn't exist before this incident took place. At least you can't find it using the Wayback Machine, which is pretty unusual. And on top of that, the picture that was used on Facebook, which has these apartheid patches on, that appears to have been faked through forensic analysis. And the way they did it, they found that when you compress that photograph, the patches compress differently than the rest of the photo, so it does appear that they were digitally added. I suppose we could add a couple of things to that, which is that you've got this picture of him entering the church, but it's only a still, and why don't they show the entire moving picture taken by the security camera? You know, a still photo is a lot easier to Photoshop than a moving one. And we also have this manifesto, which you talked about with Larry Pinkney, which appears to have been written not by someone with a 9th grade education. Maybe it was. We don't have really a lot of other writing from Dylann Roof to compare it with, but it certainly raises that question as well. And that it's interesting that manifesto was discovered by a couple of computer geeks who are very politically motivated. One of them is a self-admitted communist, so there appears to be more perhaps than just sheer detective work involved.
Let me just ask you also, what about the 3 names? You know, Dylann Storm Roof, that they kept calling him all the time on TV, which is a little awkward. But, you know, anytime there's James Earl Ray, there's always 3 names whenever they kind of refer to what I think is a Manchurian Candidate. Have you ever followed that or looked into that?
I've certainly heard it discussed, you know, Lee Harvey Oswald and Osama bin Laden, and it does seem that they always choose to use 3 names when they have a highlighting of one of these assassins or alleged assassins taking place. That's another thing that might just factor in. Plus, the name Storm. You think of Desert Storm, but you don't really think of that being a person's name normally.
Well, for sure you don't. Yeah, for sure you don't. You know, I want to go back to the reloading 5 times because that thing just has stuck with me. And I just had this visual of what's happening in there. And remember, somebody was taking pictures. They were videoing a prayer meeting with a bunch of people sitting around a table, which maybe that's exciting for them. I don't know. But I don't think I would want somebody in there, if I was in a prayer meeting, recording it. But be that as it may, they were recording this, and of course we never got to the point of, you know, the shooting. Never do, but and nothing caught it on camera, supposedly. And there was one lady that was supposedly told to stay alive because he wanted her to tell the story. We've never seen her. She's never told the story. But at the same time, he was reloading 5 times. Now, maybe it doesn't take that long to put a magazine in, but still, you know, these were big guys there at that church. They could have stormed, I hate to use that term, but they could have attacked him during that time, could they not?
That should be your instinct when you sense that your life is threatened and you see that the individual has ceased firing in order to reload, either to flee or to approach him, to throw something at him, to strike him, and to physically disable him so he cannot fire again. That would be instinctive. Of course, there's different scenarios you can think of. Maybe most of these people have already been wounded by the first set of rounds. I understand there were 13 rounds in the magazine. But also your point about the videotaping of a Bible study, that is unusual. You would think that cameras would be aimed at security points of a church as opposed to the place where people are undergoing a Bible study, unless they had some reason for recording it for religious reasons. But I haven't seen that in any church that I've attended before.
No, and I don't know, maybe it was some individual that was wanting to record, but I wouldn't want somebody recording in there. That just doesn't make any sense. And then to think that everybody just kind of stood there and looked at him, and they were just so close. They were all sitting around a table. They were close enough to knock the kid, the 110-pound or 120-pound kid down. But nobody did anything. So what more than this causes you concern that we've not covered yet, James?
Well, one thing, we're talking about photographs. There are these photographs of him burning the American flag and holding the Confederate flag, but some of these are taken at a distance, and it doesn't look like they're selfies, does it? It looks like somebody assisted him, which again suggests orchestration as opposed to lone wolf acting on his own as he's been portrayed. And another thing, getting back to the church, is, and somebody spotted this very quickly, that the Mother Emanuel AME Church has a long history of ties to Freemasonry going back to the 19th century, and that some of the current pastors are Freemasons. And, of course, there are many Freemasons who are certainly not involved in anything nefarious. I know some myself. But we also know that Freemasonry has branches which, at the top, are linked to Luciferianism, and Freemasons have been used historically in revolutionary and other scenarios. They've been used because of two reasons, Joyce. One is that they have oaths of absolute secrecy, and they have oaths of absolute obedience to the Brotherhood. And sometimes I've seen cases where the oath to the Brotherhood outweighed their oath to tell the truth on a deposition. So that's just something to be remembered, and there are actually Freemasonic crosses in some of the windows of this church as well. So that's something else to think about. Freemasonry has a long history in Charleston going back a long ways. And another thing, too, was that the shooting incident took place on the same day that Congress was voting on the TPP, which, again, may be coincidence, but certainly distracted national attention from a very important vote, a vote that is going to enrich multinational corporations at the expense of the American people and foreign workers.
Well, I think the diversions that we've seen lately are really... it's working well for them. And, that brings up the issue of Dannemora, that CNN, not only is the world's biggest problem a Confederate flag, but it's also two guys that escaped from Dannemora. One was shot, one was captured, and that's the end of the story, but they're covering it. It's like Groundhog Day. Every single day, that's what's on CNN. Do you have any ideas on what might be the agenda behind focusing on the two guys from Dannemora or Clinton Correctional that escaped?
Yes, I think it ties into Charleston. I think it ties into Jade Helm. I was immediately struck, Joyce, by how the mass media was showing this army of law enforcement personnel. And my first thought was, well, we've had guys escape from prison before. And granted, these guys are dangerous killers, but we've never seen this kind of a dragnet being hyped in the media. And it seems to be acclimating public opinion to accept the police state. That's what I think is going on. I think they're really getting us ready for martial law and the idea of police in the streets.
I think you're probably right. And this show of we can go into anybody's house anytime, any place, and search it probably met their needs also. It's just all coming down around the same time. And, of course, we're looking at September as being a pivotal time for this country. The Pope's going to speak to Congress, which I don't know what that means. But, all of these things coming down around September have made a lot of people very uncomfortable. Are you thinking that September is a pivotal time?
I definitely am. And because there have been so many hints dropped about it, my suspicion, Joyce, has been that they might use terrorist incidents or civil strife to transition Jade Helm into some sort of martial law state, because you saw what happened in France after the Charlie Hebdo incident, which many people think was staged, and we saw what happened in Watertown, Mass. with a lockdown after the Boston Marathon. These terrorist-type incidents are used to generate martial law, which would be your first step. But to get people out of their homes and into FEMA camps, the main excuse for that is usually some sort of weather event like a hurricane. And I am concerned that once they got martial law sort of in progress, we might see some massive geoengineered event that would call for massive evacuations to the FEMA camp. You might know that on May 29th, Hollywood released a movie called San Andreas, I haven't seen it, but I understand at the end they're at what they call a relief camp. That's what it says on the IMDb review. So they seem to be acclimating us to get ready for that. And there's one thing, Joyce, that kind of tipped me off. Now, I'm not a person who plays around with numbers and numerology at all, but it seems that the Illuminati did do that. And a fellow truther pointed out to me that a lot of Hollywood movies have been dropping hints about September the 23rd, 2015, and I did see those. And 2 weeks later, the Amtrak crash came, and I immediately felt that we've seen so many plane crashes, train crashes, and it just seems like I've already seen a thing on 60 Minutes where DARPA remote controls a car and makes it so that the driver can't even hit the brakes. They can remote control planes and cars, so I'm sure they can do the same thing with a train. But my truther friend said, Amtrak crashed at 9:23, and I was dubious. But I went, and sure enough, the film footage taken by security cameras are timestamped 9:23 when Amtrak crashed, and if that was indeed an engineered event and they choose to do it at 9:23, they're dropping some very serious dark hints. Again, I'm not into numerology, they are, but it does look like they're getting ready for something in September. As you said, the Pope will be visiting President Obama on 9:23, so it appears that they're building up a number of things leading to something very dark happening. I do feel that foreboding about it, and I do feel that we need to be extremely alert, and that people should be getting ready for some type of emergency situation, which we should anyway, but I do think that people should be at least be getting ready for a grid down, power out, food and fuel shortage type of situations, the way things are shaping up between the Jade Helm, hints of martial law, and these dark hints about something in September.
You know what I think is interesting is they're now trying to pull the everybody gets scared for July 4th situation. It's all about, ISIS might be coming on July 4th, so be careful, because this is Independence Day and they hate freedom and all that stuff. But you know what, now they just announced that beware of fireworks. They could have been made by ISIS. I mean, are you kidding me? Like they're going to blow up and now everybody's going to be scared of using fireworks. I mean, this stuff is so stupid. I mean, I call it the bog set. A bunch of guys sitting around a table dreaming all this stuff up, thinking that, hey, I got a good one. Let's try this. Let's tell them ISIS is going to make the fireworks. I mean, I can just hear these guys doing this kind of ridiculous storytelling. And I want to go back to what is on your website. What was it, Thomas Jefferson, that you quote there, that said, nothing can be believed which is seen in a newspaper. And I think we need to realize probably nothing is the truth that we read and or see on television. Do you not agree?
You've made the point, Joyce, you made it in our film Shadowing when you were being interviewed, when you asked the question, is it possible that everything we've been told is a lie? And when you realize that we have long-term now been under the control of an oligarchy, and, I like to use a quote that is from Ferdinand Lundberg, a writer for the Wall Street Journal. And he wrote a fantastic book in 1937 called America's 60 Families. And he said this, quote, the United States is owned and dominated by a hierarchy of its richest families. These families are the center of the modern oligarchy which dominates the United States, functioning under a democratic form of government behind which a de facto government, absolutist, has gradually taken form. This de facto government is actually the government of the United States, invisible, shadowy. It's the government of money and a dollar democracy, unquote. And he said that in 1937. It's only consolidated its power more. But back in 1937, in that book, America's 60 Families, he has a chapter on newspapers, which was the main form of media back then. He documented that these families owned virtually every newspaper chain from coast to coast. He goes through it. Who owned it? Just using financial records as a financial writer. So, yes, they've been created a matrix for years that and people need to get out of it and jump into the truth of the truth movement.
We're talking to James Perloff today. Truth is a Lonely Warrior and Shadow Ring, available at the Power Mall. Give us a call at 877-817-9829. We'll be back after this 3-minute break. Let's take a couple of phone calls at the Power Hour, 855-995-6923. Welcome back to Power Hour. Thank you for joining us. We're talking to James Perloff, and his website is jamesperloff.com, PERLOFF.com. Excellent website. A lot of good material there. Check it out. I love that Thomas Jefferson quote. It's the way it is, I really believe. Let's go to Mayat in New York. Mayat, you're on the air. Go ahead, please, with James Perloff.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Perloff, really appreciate your work. I'm thinking about getting your books, although I don't have any room, and are they available if I go with an e-reader? And I want to make, you can answer that after I make my two comments regarding Charleston. I want to talk about, first, the crime scene. It seems that there are no photos. You know, I know in New York when somebody dies in their apartment or what have you, or there's a murder, you always see them bringing you see video footage of the body bringing out, and I also didn't see any of that, and also the taping off and the investigation of the crime scene didn't happen. My last comment is that I've heard it said that blacks are the most magnanimous peoples on the planet in light of their distinct and separate and continuing reality. However, this idea that you lose your mother, your brother, your sister, and that you, like you said, 24 hours, you come out and you can just say, you know, we've forgiven already, that just doesn't add up.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
Hey, thank you very much, Mayat, for the phone call.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is it available on e-reader, first of all?
Yes, my book, Truth of the Lonely Warrior, is available as a Kindle. And if people don't own a Kindle device, you can download Kindle software from Amazon for free onto your PC or tablet and read Kindle books there. So it is available, Truth of the Lonely Warrior, in both paperback and Kindle form.
Okay.
And I thank Mayat for also reinforcing what we're saying about the lack of evidence of, being taped off and the church being a crime scene through the rapid reopening of the church. So we appreciate her comments and insights.
Okay. All right, let's go to Dave in Arkansas. I want to try to get through everybody here. Dave in Arkansas, you're on the air. Go ahead, please. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I've got two things. One, did you know the church had a termite problem, and I think it might have been going to be condemned, so that could be where some of that money went to. And were the funerals, were they closed caskets?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. Let me ask him, were the caskets closed at these funerals? Do you know, James Perloff?
The funeral for Pinckney, Clementa Pinckney, who was as well as a pastor, was a Democratic politician. He was a South Carolina legislator, was open. Now, I don't want to get too deeply into this. There are some people on YouTube who have already been saying that the body in the open casket, which certainly could be used to certify that the deaths really happened, that he appears quite different from he's much stockier than the Clementa Pinckney who we see. On the other hand, Joyce, I will comment that death, especially a violent death, and the work of an undertaker will transform one's appearance, so I don't want to comment too quickly on that. But his was open. I have also heard about the termite problem. But while we're on that, I just want to transition over to something that might relate to all this as another one of those coincidence things, and I was mentioning this to you when I was talking to you last night, was that you recall that there was a movie called Wag the Dog made in the late 1990s when Clinton was president, and it was all about how the president has a sex scandal right before the election, and so he hires Hollywood to create a fake war in Albania that exists only in a movie studio, and it's downloaded onto the news stations, and the public gets so distracted they forget about the scandal. Well, it seems that one day after the Charleston shootings, that President Obama met with Steven Spielberg and Jeffrey Katzenberg in Hollywood, which may be a coincidence, but certainly raises that question if Hollywood has been employed once again to be used for political purposes.
All right, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. We're out of time, but thank you so very much for joining us. We're going to have James McKinney joining us in this next segment. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Excellent.